You're not addicted to what you think. You think it's just a small habit, something you can stop any time. But if you really could stop, why do you keep going back? Not once, not twice, but over and over, as if there's an invisible force pulling you back to the very thing you know is wrong. You haven't lost control on the outside. You still live normally. You still pray. You still believe in God. But there's a place inside you where you're no longer honest with yourself. And the most dangerous thing is you don't call it addiction. You call it personality. You call it a habit. You call it something everyone has. But the Bible doesn't call it that. And there are things God condemns that most people have never realized they are living in. Not because they're evil, but because they've never looked deep enough. And if you don't recognize this right now, you will keep repeating it in silence for years to come without understanding why you're never truly free. There was a time I truly believed I didn't have a problem. I wasn't addicted to alcohol, not addicted to substances. I didn't do what people usually call big sins, and so I thought I was fine. But that was exactly when I started getting stuck the deepest. I remember there were days I would wake up with a very familiar feeling, not pain, not fear, but emptiness. A light emptiness, but lingering, and I never let it stay there for long. I opened my phone. I looked for something to fill it. A video, a message, something that made me feel again. I didn't call it addiction. I just thought, everyone's like that. But then I started realizing something. It wasn't that I was choosing. It was I was reacting. Every time silence appeared, I immediately ran from it. Every time I felt not enough, I looked for something to prove I was still okay. Every time an uncomfortable thought showed up, I didn't face it. I covered it up. And what I didn't understand back then was I wasn't addicted to the action. I was addicted to the feeling of control, the feeling of being acknowledged, the feeling of not having to face the truth inside me. There were nights I clearly knew I was doing what I shouldn't be doing. No one saw, no one knew, but I knew. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel guilty immediately. I felt normal, even comfortable. That's when I realized something very dangerous. You can live in something wrong long enough that it starts to feel right. I still prayed, I still talked to God, but there was a part of me I was never honest about. I didn't talk about the things I kept going back to every day, the thoughts I nurtured, the things I clearly knew were not from Him. I kept them, not because I didn't know, but because I didn't want to let go. You may not realize this, but there are things you don't give up, not because you can't, but because you still need them. I needed the feeling of control. I needed the feeling of attention. I needed the feeling that I'm still okay. And those things became the place I returned to every time I was weak. Not once, but repeatedly. And then one day, I started asking myself a question I had never dared to ask before. If I'm truly free, why can't I stop? That wasn't a comfortable question, because it no longer gave me a reason to excuse myself. It forced me to look straight at the truth. There are things inside me that are controlling me more than I think. And the scariest part wasn't that I was stuck. It was that I had gotten used to being stuck. I had built a version of myself that could live with it. A version that still looked fine, still believed in God, still lived normally. But inside, there was always a loop. Do you know that loop? It starts with a small feeling, a little anxiety, a little emptiness, a little not enough. Then you look for something to fill it. And in that moment, you feel a little better, but only for a while. Then it comes back, and this time a little deeper. You don't realize, but every time you go back like that, you're teaching yourself something. This is where I find relief. And gradually, it's no longer a choice. It becomes the default path. I lived like that longer than I want to admit. No one knew, because from the outside, everything still looked fine. And that's the most dangerous thing. The things that destroy you rarely look like destruction. They look like just one more time. It's just a small thing. Everyone does it. But God doesn't see it that way. Not because He wants to control you, but because He clearly sees that it's controlling you. And there's a truth that took me a long time to accept. Not everything you repeat is a habit. Some things you repeat are bondage. And if you don't call it by its right name, you will never escape it. I used to think, I just need to be stronger. I just need to try harder. But no, you can't escape something that you're still protecting. And what changed me wasn't a sermon, not a video. It was a very quiet moment when I had nothing left to distract me. No phone, no noise, nothing to cover what was really inside me. And for the first time, I didn't run. I stayed. And what I saw wasn't the actions, but the deeper things, the fear of being abandoned, the need to be acknowledged, the emptiness I had never dared to name. That's when I understood what I called habits were actually the places where I was searching for what only God could fill. And if you're still listening this far, maybe you're realizing something too. Not on the outside, but inside you. Something you keep going back to, something you don't want to name, something you've learned to live with. And maybe you've never thought that. God is looking at that, not first with condemnation, but with a question. Why do you still need it when I am here? But to understand that question, you have to see what's really happening. And there is a story about a man who lived in that very loop longer than he thought, without ever realizing it, until everything started to fall apart. His name was Daniel. If you looked at his life, you wouldn't see anything wrong. A stable job, a family without major problems, a man everyone thought was fine. Daniel believed that too. At least on the surface. He wasn't the type to lose control, not impulsive, not the type to fall in an obvious way. Everything in him seemed under control. But there was one thing no one saw, not even him. Every morning, Daniel woke up, not with purpose, but with a light feeling very hard to name. Not sad, not happy, but lacking. He didn't stop to understand it. He didn't have time for that. He started his day like every other day. Phone, messages, emails, news, small things, but enough to fill that gap. Daniel didn't think it was a problem. He just thought, this is life. But then there were moments when everything slowed down. A late evening, a quiet room, nothing left to do. Dischichi, and that was when the feeling came back. No longer light, clearer. A question appeared, one Daniel didn't like. Why don't I feel enough? He didn't answer. He didn't want to answer. He stood up, found something to do, opened something to watch. And within just a few minutes, the feeling disappeared. But what Daniel didn't know was, every time he did that, he wasn't solving anything. He was training himself. Training himself to avoid silence, avoid facing things, avoid the truth. Time passed. No major incident, no big fall. Only a loop growing deeper. Daniel began to notice something small. He no longer liked being alone. Not because he was lonely, but because when he was alone, he had to face himself. And there was a part of him he didn't want to look at. Then one day, something very small happened. Not something big, not a tragedy. Just, he made a mistake at work, a small error. But his reaction was not small. He wasn't just irritated, he was triggered. A wave of self-blame. Comparison. Feeling not enough. It didn't come from that mistake. It came from something that had been there for a long time. And this time he couldn't turn it off as quickly as before. He tried doing what he always did. Watch something, do something, avoid it. But it didn't disappear. It stayed. Longer, deeper. And for the first time, Daniel didn't immediately run. Meek, not because he was stronger, but because he was tired. Tired of always having to be fine, tired of always having to control his feelings, tired of not understanding what was happening inside him. He sat down. Did nothing. Silence. And in that silence, something began to surface. Not actions, not habits. But the fear of being judged, the need to always be right, the feeling that if he wasn't good enough he would lose his worth. Daniel didn't realize those things had been controlling him for a long time. Not in an obvious way, but in a very subtle way. Every time he checked his phone, not because he needed to, but because he needed a feeling of validation. Every time he avoided silence, not because he was busy, but because he was afraid of what would surface. Every time he tried to control everything, not because of responsibility, but because he couldn't stand the feeling of losing control. And that was when something began to change. Daniel no longer looked at his actions the way he used to. He began to see, this is not a habit. This is something I'm dependent on. not dependent on substances, but dependent on the feeling of safety, the feeling of control, the feeling of being acknowledged. Big, and what scared him most was realizing he no longer knew who he was if those things were taken away. It was no longer a choice. It was part of his identity. And in that very moment, he began to understand something he had never considered before. There are bondages that don't look like bondage. They look like, this is who I am. I've always been this way. I just need this. But in reality, they are the very things holding you back. And if you had asked Daniel at that time, "Are you addicted?" he would have said, "No." But if you asked a different question, "Is there something you can't stop even if you want to?" he would have been silent. And in that silence, the truth began to surface. But Daniel still hadn't seen everything. He had only touched the surface. Because what came next was the most dangerous thing, not what he did, but what he believed. And there are things God doesn't just want you to stop, He wants you to clearly see. Because if you don't clearly see, you will misname the problem. And if you misname it, you will fight the wrong battle. And that's why so many people try to change but are never truly free. Not because they don't try, but because they have never truly understood what is actually holding them back. You may have thought your problem is what you do, the actions, the habits, the times you slip. But no, that's just the surface. What the Bible warns about doesn't begin with the action. It begins with dependence. Not the thing you do once, but the thing you return to when you're weak. Chapter. And that's why there are addictions that most people never recognize. Not because they don't read the Bible, but because they read without looking at themselves. You can hear this and still think, not me. But pause for a moment, not to analyze, not to argue. Just ask, when I feel empty, where do I go? Because that answer will reveal what you're truly dependent on. And there are things God calls wrong that you call normal. Not because you intend to, but because you've lived with them too long. 1. You're not addicted to your phone, you're addicted to distraction. You don't open your phone because you need to. You open it when you don't want to feel something. An emptiness, an uncomfortable thought, a feeling of not being enough. And instead of staying, you leave. You don't call that addiction. You call it killing time. But the truth is, you're running from yourself. The Bible speaks about watchfulness, but you always need noise. And if you can't sit still in silence, maybe you're not truly free. 2. You're not addicted to people, you're addicted to validation. You need responses from others. You need to be seen. You need confirmation that you have value. Not once, but repeatedly. You post, you wait, you check. Not because you want to, but because you need to. And without it, you start doubting yourself. The Bible says, your value comes from God. But you are looking for it in the eyes of others. And the dangerous thing is, you don't call it dependence. You call it connection. 3. You're not addicted to control. You're addicted to false safety. You want everything your way, not because you like control, but because you're afraid. Afraid something will go wrong. Afraid of loss. Afraid of not knowing what will happen. And to avoid that feeling, you try to keep everything in your hands. But you don't realize that's not strength, that's fear in disguise. The Bible speaks about trust, but you can't let go. 4. You're not addicted to negative thoughts, you're addicted to believing them. There are thoughts you know aren't true, but you still listen. You still believe. You still let them define you. I'm not good enough. I can't change. I've always been this way. You don't just hear those thoughts, you return to them. Like a habit. And gradually, they're no longer just thoughts. They become identity. The Bible says, renew your mind. But you are living in a loop that is never challenged. 5. You're not addicted to emotions, you're addicted to familiarity. Even when it hurts, even when it's wrong, you still return to old emotions. Sadness, anxiety, self-blame, guilt. Not because you like them, but because they're familiar. And what's familiar always feels safe, even when it's destroying you. The Bible says, the truth will set you free. But you keep choosing familiar emotions over truth. 6. You're not addicted to sin. You're addicted to going back. Not one fall, not one mistake, but the loop. You know it's wrong. You regret it. You say, last time. Then you go back. And each time, something happens. You start believing you can't change. And that is the real bondage. Not the action, but the belief that you're stuck. 7. You're not addicted to the world. You're addicted to replacing God. You don't say that. You don't realize that. But every time you look for peace in a place that isn't Him, every time you look for value in a place that isn't Him, every time you look for fullness in a place that isn't Him, you are replacing Him. not with something obvious, but with many small things. And that's why you still feel lacking, even though you have so much. Do you see? Not all of these things look like addiction. But they have one thing in common: you return to them when you're weak, when you're empty, when you don't want to face things. And if you don't stop to see that, you will keep living in a loop that you call normal life. But the Bible does not call it normal. Not to condemn you, but to wake you up. Because the truth is, what you return to is becoming what you worship. And you don't have to kneel before it for it to become your God. You just have to not be able to live without it. And if you truly look deep within yourself, maybe you've already seen one of these things not as someone else's, but yours. And that's when everything starts to feel uncomfortable. Because now you can't pretend anymore. You can't say, "This is just a habit," because you've seen more clearly. And when you see clearly, you stand before a choice. Keep going back or face it. And what I'm about to tell you next is not easy to hear. But if you don't hear it, you will continue to be held back by the very things you are protecting. At this point, you can no longer say you didn't know. Not because someone explained it to you, but because you saw yourself in it. Maybe not all of it, but at least one thing. Something you return to, something you justify, something you've never called by its real name. And now the question is no longer, is it wrong? The question is, why are you still holding on to it? This is where most people stop, not because they don't understand, but because they don't want to go further. Because going further means you have to be honest. Not with others, but with yourself. You have to admit that there is a part of you that still wants it. Not because you're foolish, not because you're weak, and but because it's giving you something. A feeling, a comfort, a way to avoid facing things. And if you don't admit that, you will always fight the wrong battle. You will keep trying to stop the behavior while still protecting the reason behind it. And that's why you stop for a few days, a few weeks. Then you go back. Not because you failed, but because you never truly let go. Let me say this more clearly. You are not trapped, you are cooperating. Not completely, but enough for it to keep existing. You cooperate every time you say, just this once, it's fine, I can control it. You cooperate every time you avoid silence, every time you don't want to look deeper, every time you choose easy instead of true. And the hardest thing to hear is, you're not just keeping it, you're protecting it. You protect it with excuses. You protect it with busyness. You protect it by never stopping long enough to see it. But there's one thing you can't avoid forever. The truth is always there waiting for your silence. Wow! And when you are silent, you won't just see the behavior. You will see the fear you've never named, the emptiness you've never accepted, the lack you've always tried to cover. And that is where everything becomes real. No more excuses, no more justification, no more everyone does it. Just you and the truth. You can try to quit it. You can force yourself to change. But if you haven't faced this, what am I looking for in this? You will always go back. Not because you want to, but because you still need it. And until you see that clearly, you will never truly be free. Because freedom does not begin when you stop the behavior. It begins when you no longer need it. Pause for a moment. No need to say it out loud. No need to write it down. Just be honest. When you are weak, where do you go? When you are empty, what do you fill it with? When you are afraid, what do you cling to? Don't answer quickly. Because the first answer is usually not the real one. Go a little deeper. Basi, and when you see it, don't rush to fix it. Don't rush to promise. Don't rush to change. Just look. Because many people have never truly looked at themselves. And that's why they live their entire lives without understanding why they keep returning to the same loop. You don't need more information. You don't need more advice. You need one thing, the truth that you can no longer run from. And if you are here, listening all the way to this moment, maybe this is the first time you didn't turn away. Not because you are strong, but because you are ready. Ready to see. Ready to call it by its real name. Ready to stop pretending. And that is where everything begins to change. Not on the outside, but from within. But there is something you need to understand before you try to do anything next. You cannot free yourself if you are still trying to hold on to the thing that is binding you. And this is where many people stop. They see, they understand, they admit, but they don't let go. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't know how. And if you are there in this very moment, I don't want you to try harder. I want you to do something different, Petit. Not action, not control, but return. Not return to a principle, not return to a list of things to do, but return to the one you have been trying to replace with everything else. And there is something that happens when you truly return, not with words, but with the truth inside you. That is when healing begins. Not loud, not fast, but real. And if you are ready, we will not end here. We will not just realize. We will let go. Together. Right now. Don't rush to do anything. You don't need to promise God that you'll change right now. You don't need to try to become better in this moment. Just stop. Because if you keep running, you'll return to the old loop again. But if you stop for the first time, you won't be running from yourself anymore. Stay there for a moment. No phone, no distractions, no noise. Just you and what you just saw. It may not feel comfortable. It may make you want to leave immediately. But this time don't. Because this is not the place where you are condemned. This is where you begin to be free. God doesn't need you to be perfect to come to Him. He just needs you to be real. Not the version you show to others, not the version you think you're supposed to become, but the real you. With everything you're still holding, what you haven't let go of, what you've never said out loud. You don't have to hide anymore. Because He has already seen, not just what you do, but what you are searching for behind those things. And He does not come to take away, He comes to replace. Not with rules, not with pressure, but with His presence. A presence that, if you truly encounter it, you will no longer need those other things. If you are ready, not to try harder, but to let go, stay with me in this prayer. You don't have to say it out loud. Just be honest. Lord, I don't come to you today with answers. I come with what I just saw. I see the things I've repeated, the places I've returned to, the things I've called normal, but are actually holding me back. I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to say I'm fine when inside I'm not. Lord, I have searched for things that only you can give. I have searched for peace in places that cannot hold it for long. I have searched for value in things that change every day. And now, I don't want to keep living like this. Not because I am strong, but because I am tired. Tired of going back. Tired of trying and then failing again. Tired of not understanding why I can't stop. Lord, if there is anything in me that I am holding on to, that is holding on to me, please show it to me. Not to condemn me, but to free me. I don't just want to stop the behavior. I want to be free from the inside. I give back to you the things I have never wanted to release. The things I thought I needed, but really I was just used to them. Lord, this time I'm not trying to control anymore. I let go. Not because I know how, but because I trust that you can. Stay with me in this silence. Not so I feel something immediately, but so I know you are here. and I don't have to return to those things anymore. Amen. Don't rush to get up. Don't go back immediately to the old habit. Just stay there a little longer. Because real change does not begin with a big action. It begins with one moment when you don't go back like before. And if you've stayed until now, that means you don't want to live the old way anymore. And I want you to do one small thing, but something very real. Write down or in your heart, I no longer call it a habit. Not for anyone else to read, but so you can see something is changing inside you. And if this has touched you, not like a video, but like a truth you just realized, leave a comment. I have seen. Not to prove anything, but so you are not fighting alone anymore. And if you want to continue this journey, not just to listen, but to truly change, subscribe to the God Heals Prayer channel. Not for the algorithm, but because you will need these words when you are weak. You will need to be reminded when you want to go back. And you need to know you are not the only one walking through this. You are not broken. You are not too far gone. You are not left behind. You are simply being called back, and this time not by effort, but by truth.